Hi guys! I just watched a video on the Four Queens called Pantheism, Prayer and Why Labels Don't Really Matter. And it really got me thinking about a few things that have been on my mind quite a lot recently. So I thought I'd make a video. I might actually make this a video response to that. I think Kellyanne posted it just over a week ago, but I was on vacation for a week and a half, so I haven't been watching videos, so I only got around to watching it now. I think Kellyanne makes a few very interesting points about maybe the pitfalls of using labels to sort of set yourself above others, or I suppose using religions and the tendency of, really in any religion, the tendency of people to use their religions in a negative way in order to enforce their power negatively over others. And she kind of says towards the end that if you're finding yourself focusing more on other people's beliefs, other people's practices, other people's spiritual path more than your own, that you should really address this and think about why that might be. I think there are probably a lot of reasons why this might happen, why you might find yourself focusing really strongly on a label, on trying to fit a label, or on wanting to learn everything you can about one specific person's path or one specific religion. I think it definitely can become quite unhealthy in a few different ways. Of course, people don't always just try to do this in order to have a greater sense of superiority. Certainly people will grasp at labels in order to instill a greater sense of superiority in themselves. But of course also labels can be a crutch for people who actually just don't have any self-confidence in their own spirituality or in their own ability to find their own way. But I think what's most interesting to me about the question about labels and whether they're important or not is that, as I've said before, I've always found it difficult to fit into any particular labels. But at the same time, I'm kind of constantly grappling with various different terms that might describe my beliefs, that might describe my practice. And it has actually ended up always being quite an important thing for me, despite the fact, or maybe because of the fact, that I tend to not really be able to define myself by any simple terms or by anybody else's practice. So I liked Kellyanne's message that at the end of the day, maybe coming up with a label that really fits you isn't the most important thing, that really you should just be looking at what your own beliefs are and what's important to you, and examining, I suppose, whether your ethics are sound and whether what you're following, what you're practicing, and whether all that really rings true to you. And also when we're looking at reaching out to other people and people in other religions and other spiritualities, not to be making any assumptions, I suppose, based on what their religion or spirituality officially says it is, but rather it might be more important to look at what their impulses are and whether they are good impulses, whether they are impulses for good. There's been quite a lot of talk recently, particularly in the pagan blogging community, about polytheists wanting to branch away from paganism and deciding that they don't want to use the term paganism anymore because of this increasing divide and increasing antagonism between pagans who maybe view the gods or the divine as archetypes and so forth, and those who are hard polytheists. I suppose I can see where those polytheists are coming from. I can see how if they did view those gods as personal beings, then it must be quite frustrating to be associated, to have their practices or beliefs associated with people who don't believe that at all, because to them it must seem quite profane. But at the same time I find it quite sad that these people don't seem to think that there is anything to be gained from embracing a label that might include all of us, and embracing diversity within that label. At the end of the day, I feel as though surely our relationship with the divine is kind of quite a personal thing. Personally, I enjoy striking up dialogue with people of all kinds of religions. It doesn't really matter to me if their beliefs align with mine, because to be honest, most of the time they don't. And within the pagan community, overwhelmingly other people's beliefs don't align with mine. But I still find it very interesting to talk to those people, to listen to their views, to, you know, read their blogs and watch their videos. Because I suppose at the end of the day, what I'm interested in is just hearing about their own human experience, their spiritual experience. And I suppose picking up nuggets of gold from that and pieces of advice, maybe not so much how specifically to practice or how specifically to view things, but how to approach figuring these things out for ourselves. At the end of the day, our spiritual journey is overwhelmingly personal. I think even for people who are associated with major world religions and organised religion, I think even for those people, although they see it maybe more as a community thing, it's certainly personal. I think anybody, in particular anybody who communes with deity, that has to be an incredibly personal thing, no matter what way that is done. So at the end of the day, I don't know that any two people really can ever say that they have the same spirituality, and I certainly think that the more dialogue that can be had between different people with different diverse beliefs, the better. It got me thinking quite a lot about, I might be kind of repeating myself a little bit with this, but about my view on the divine and of deities and how I integrate them into my practice. But specifically on my view of cosmos as Gaia, which might not be something I've talked about an awful lot on this YouTube channel yet. In fact, I don't think I really have at all, because it's something that was central to my practice for quite a long time while I was building it initially. But it's kind of become a little bit more problematic over time for me. I suppose the more I've thought about deities and what they mean to me, and as well maybe the more I've talked to other people about my practice, I think using specific deities to represent specific things, I think it can be a lot more problematic once you start to discuss that with other people, because obviously other people have other experiences of those deities, other associations with those deities. And I suppose it's kind of the same thing with labels. To me, using Gaia to mean cosmos, or using Gaia as a symbolic representation of cosmos or the universe, has in a way kind of become a bit of a label for me. It's become, or it did become for a while, a way for me to describe my practice to other people. This was an identification that I got from, as I keep mentioning, Pagayan cosmology. I just found it to be a very powerful personification of cosmos. The symbolism of it really struck a chord with me, and I really went with that for a very long time. I had written a blog post about this maybe 9 months ago or so, called Gaia as the Universe, something like that. And it was reblogged a little while ago on humanistic paganism. And someone commented on it. Well, we actually had a bit of a discussion back and forth between a few different people about how this might actually be problematic. If you want to read that blog post, I'll link it below. Because obviously, well, traditionally and also in modern society, Gaia has generally been understood as an earth goddess, a goddess that is associated specifically with our planet. I never really had a problem initially with expanding that out to being the universe, I suppose because I'm a pantheist, and a monistic pantheist at that. So to me it just seemed like a really straightforward sort of expansion of Gaia, if everything in the universe is all one and the same. To me, I suppose the Earth is like a microcosm of the entire universe. I feel as though all the patterns and laws of the universe can be obviously seen in Earth. Because obviously as a pantheist, I see the cosmos as being divine, or the entire universe as being divine. But I wanted to put a name on that, I suppose. I wanted to personify it. Because like Kellyanne, I find that the most meaningful practice for me, meaningful spiritual practice for me, happens when I do use personification. But I suppose this kind of became more problematic when I started to talk to other people about it, and other people certainly had mixed reactions to it. A lot of people definitely agreed that they could see where I was coming from, that they liked the idea of using Gaia in this way, but at the same time thought that it might be a bit confusing or a bit problematic because of the more common associations with Gaia. It kind of has turned me away a little bit from using Gaia synonymously with cosmos, as that was the way I tended to write on my blog up until now. I tended to kind of say, to just use the terms Gaia and cosmos synonymously. I'm definitely kind of moving away from that now. I've tended to use maybe goddess, as in God/DESS. It makes an awful lot more sense written down. Just in an attempt to not gender divinity or the cosmos. Although, as if you've watched my videos up till now, you will know that I do tend to gender cosmos and the divinity as female more often than male. But that's really just a personal preference when it comes to personification. It's not. It's certainly not a rigid. It's certainly not a rigid symbolism or something that I see as innately true. It's funny that the more I get into my practice, the more problematic all these labels start to get. In the beginning, I was quite pleased with just describing myself as a spiritual atheist, and then it was kind of a pagan atheist, and then pantheism kind of started to come into it, and then I kind of was saying, well, I have to drop atheism then. If I'm a pantheist, I can't be an atheist at the same time. It's kind of juggling those two in feeling that I was maybe an emotional pantheist but a logical atheist. And the more I get into it and the more I practice and the more I think, the kind of further I go down into the rabbit hole, I suppose you could say, and it just all starts to become quite complicated. And I think this is the point at which labels start to lose their usefulness for me. Calling myself a Gaian pagan or anything like that is also starting to become problematic too. Kellyanne also talked a little bit about her own interactions with deity, and how even though she considers deities to be archetypes, that they are very much a part of her practice and a part of her reverence of divinity. She's talking about how for her she connects with the archetype of the dark goddess more than any else, and it kind of just hit me that for a pantheist, and obviously this is true for me too, for a pantheist, if they're interacting with deity, quite often that deity, even though they might represent something quite specific within human understanding of the world or within society or things like that, that deity is still representing the all. It might sort of be a facet of the all, but I suppose at the end of the day it's more of a way of seeing the all. Things like creative force, destructive force, and the great mother, all of those kinds of archetypes and all of the deities, really, yes, you can see them as facets of the whole. But I think for me, it's not necessarily that you need to slot them all together in order to come up with the whole picture. It's more that each individual archetype or each individual deity contains within it the entirety of the universe. And it's almost as though they're all just these different perspectives with which you can understand or attempt to understand the all or cosmos. So it sort of suddenly dawned on me that even though Gaia to other people might not be maybe the best way to describe cosmos, it might not be the most accurate way, it might be problematic for other people, I don't think that necessarily matters, or I don't think I need to have a deity at the core of my practice that is completely all-encompassing and that easily and kind of fluidly represents cosmos as all. I mean, the whole the whole point of pantheism, I suppose, of seeing cosmos as being divine, is that it's impossible to get to grips with it. The all is by definition unknowable, and it's impossible to completely understand it. So what we do when we personify it, what we do when we work with specific deities, is that we try to find a way to better know the all. We try to find a way to tap into aspects of ourselves that we aren't always in touch with, or that we mightn't understand. Or we might just use those deities to sort of tap into concepts through which we best engage with the all. So for a while there I was getting a bit anxious about how, for example, the Morrigan might fit into my the sort of neat categorization I'd come up with, because what I'd come up with was this vision of Gaia as cosmos, and within that were the forces of creation and destruction, or light and dark, and then within those I saw various deities as fitting one side more than the other, and I was coming up with this quite binary duality going on between creation and destruction, which I've talked about quite a lot on my blog for anyone who's interested. And then I kind of couldn't decide, well, what about the Morrigan? I don't see her as necessarily entirely fitting into that kind of dark mother archetype, or just purely those dark aspects of the all, of cosmos. To me she represented sort of everything. I suppose maybe that was the beginning of this shift in understanding that I've had. It's almost like I see the Morrigan as, although she definitely represents quite specific things. She represents definitely a much darker goddess than, say, Gaia. She definitely represents things like death and war and chaos and all that kind of thing. But I felt as though she was just a lens through which to see cosmos, rather than the destructive part, which needed a creative part to create the whole. So now I'm kind of thinking that I became maybe a little bit too rigid in my categorization of different concepts and trying to make it all into a neat little bundle, and that I could kind of shove together and say, yes, all of this combined is Gaia or the cosmos, because at the end of the day it's definitely more complicated than that for me, and I will definitely continue to engage with Gaia as cosmos, or as a mother goddess, or as the earth. I suppose whichever way I feel like engaging with her. But I'm not so sure that I'm going to be sort of using her as a label in the way that I have been, sort of saying in my spiritual practice Gaia is cosmos, and using that as a way of describing what I'm about or where I'm coming from. I'll leave it there for now. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you again soon.